My Govanin Melanin, and welcome back to Medieval Art. I'm Dr. Bryan Keene, and I'm thrilled to continue conversations with Dave Lewis of Cinemillennials. Dave, I thought since we've spent the last several weeks going episode by episode watching The Rings of Power, maybe we should give our viewers a sense of our backstory with Tolkien. So Dave, when did you first become aware of Tolkien, or what was your first introduction to the world of Middle-earth?
I think there's two moments that I can think of. As a child, I loved medieval history. I just got hooked on it, loving Fisher Price castles. I think I got, the video game, things like that. And from there, loving medieval arms and armor really kind of inspired me. And I think it was I remember seeing either the Burger King trailer or the goblets, which I still have one of those. Very luckily, of course, it's Frodo being the last one. Just very fitting. But I really just saw it somewhere, and I'm not sure why. And I was like, wow, that looks like something I would really, really love. So I saw the Fellowship of the Ring. I still have the ticket stub, December 26th, 2001, with my mom. I remember being probably the youngest kid there. And I just remember seeing, and I'm like, getting all emotional about it because it's still such an amazing thing for me 20 years later. Um, the slow kind of reveal of the Lord of the Rings and seeing that font, seeing that fire of the rings being forged, and that intro, and just being absolutely stunned by it. Seeing the Numenorians and the elves as the last alliance charging up that hill, super defiant and tall and fair and very beautiful kind of thing, while at the same time being this whole warlike thing as well, really inspired me and really just set off a flame in my heart for these things. And learning about Tolkien and possibly learning through The Hobbit, even before that through summer reading, not really grasping all those kind of things. And then I was like, oh my god, I need to get all of these books immediately after I saw the first one, and remembering all that kind of stuff. And then as the last 20 years have gone by, it's just something that 20 plus years now, it's just something that always comforted me. A lot of times growing up, I got bullied for liking this kind of thing. And it's always comforted me, gave me a hopeful kind of place to look at, something that I knew and loved, that I knew no one else knew and loved, except for maybe a couple family members who would always be like, Dave, what do you think about this? Encouraging this kind of learning. And still today, I'm still very happy that it's something that I stay true to myself, and has helped me throughout my life, through the hard times, through the good times. So how about you, Brian? How did you get into the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's Legendarium as a whole?
It was so nostalgic hearing you talk about those Burger King goblets, I have to say, because I too had those until fairly recently when one shattered. I'm sorry to say. But yes, I admit it was also through the Peter Jackson films. I was at the time working in a movie theater as a projectionist, and I knew that we were going to be having this first film, The Fellowship of the Rings, and I had not read anything by Tolkien. I knew, of course, all the writings of C.S. Lewis inside and out. I also had a love of the Middle Ages, not necessarily history at that point, but I was fascinated with that moment in the past in general. And after watching The Fellowship of the Ring, I also had this sense of real awe. The minute we hear Kate Blanchett as Galadriel say, Iamar prestarain, I just was enraptured by this world. That drew me in. And then I wanted to know everything about the Elven languages. And I wrote a term paper for one of my English classes about the development of languages within Middle-earth for Tolkien. I was already fascinated by language in general. I was studying Spanish and French and went on to study Italian and Portuguese. So through the Romance languages, I found that I was constantly rethinking my understanding of language in general in relation to Tolkien. And I think being able to work as a projectionist through the next few Jackson films was really wonderful, to not only see the films before all of my friends, which I thought was great, but also to be able to be that person that was trying to think critically about what was in the films, what was left out of the films. I certainly read The Fellowship of the Rings right before the movie came out. So I had that sense of adaptation of what was working in Peter Jackson's world. And I, like you, wanted to then know everything else about the world, not just reading as many of the texts as I could, but I was fascinated to go back and try to trace some of the other visual histories, both from the animated films that I only discovered much later in my college years, and then all of the artwork. That, I think, is what also fascinated me. So in reading Tolkien's works, I think it sounds like we've both sort of read them out of order, but also returned to them. So I read The Lord of the Rings first, and then The Hobbit, and then much later The Silmarillion, and would only then, even in graduate school, try to expand beyond to the rest of the realm. I'm so interested in Numenor and have spent a lot of time thinking about Numenor. But I can't get enough about the elves. So I'm constantly returning to any story that deals with the elves. So what about you? After that encounter in the movie theaters, how did you chart your journey over the last 20 plus years?
The elves are definitely, for me, the most interesting part of this world. Their elegance, their ethereal, lifestyle, or their ethereal vibe, or feeling that they get. The immortality, the concept of immortality, and how that can affect us both spiritually and in relation to the world around us, and how we see people dying, or how we see the world dying, the world going that long defeat, as Galadriel talks about. And also, just in general, as someone that has loved history, I think I speak for a lot of people that love the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's Legendarium as a whole, that we feel that there's this innate connection to a long forgotten past of our world. That this is just, as Tolkien often talks about his ideas with theology, and how we're seeing a window in a small cube or in a small cell or something like that, and we're just seeing this like little shaft of light. And that's what we think, like, as sub creations or sub creators, as people want to go on to talk about the influence of Tolkien in fantasy and in general as a whole. We see this little glimpse and we want to be like that. And I think that it really truly informs of a lot of people's worlds, and how they think about justice, how they think about what's right and what's wrong, how they think about cosmological things that are happening around us, as we can see the stars behind me. And there's so many facets to this world that we see, that we feel so super connected, as if it was part of our past, and that it can be helpful to look at how we can approach our future. And I think that's, for me, all of those things kind of combined really, really inspire me anytime I look at a new Tolkien book, whether it be The Nature of Middle Earth, The Silmarillion, which I actually listened to it for the first time. I have multiple copies of it now, beautiful copies that I almost never touch because they're too nice, but like illuminated manuscript kind of things. But I think that in that way, however way you are able to approach the stories is great. I mean, whether it be like us through the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Jackson's trilogy, or the Rings of Power, I highly recommend anybody to just dive in, find something that they really truly love about the story, and then just keep going in a little deeper and a little deeper. Like the dwarves, don't go too deep though. Don't make their mistake, but always think about how it can relate to your life and how you can help other people through learning what you have learned.
I think your analogy with the dwarves is a really good one because, of course, as Tolkien fans, we want to go as deep as possible. And I think the lesson is to not ourselves become the Balrogs that are then sort of lording our knowledge of the Legendarium over others. I think that's what's so wonderful about the world of Tolkien, is that he makes it open and accessible for everyone, really. And he himself was thinking so much about that world and remaking his world throughout his life. So I think moving forward, we certainly want to continue to have these conversations about adaptation and recognizing the points at which we've come to this series, what has informed our understanding of the Legendarium, whether it's in cinematic renditions, animated versions, the Rings of Power in the streaming series, but also all of the many writings that we've continued to enjoy, to struggle with, to work with him. But then, Dave, there are other things that we want to promise our viewers as well, as we think in an expanded Tolkien universe. What are some other conversations we can think about having over the next few years?
I think some of the best things that we can approach are cinema, and different characters or different historical figures, and how we see our world today through the eyes of these figures, or vice versa. I mean, I'm wearing The Seventh Seal, one of the most famous medieval inspired films of all time, one of the best films of all time, in my opinion, and a lot of other critics' opinion. I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from medieval adaptations of medieval histories, as well as medieval fantasies like King Arthur and Robin Hood and things like that, and how we approach that in our world today, and how we are able to interpret that in order to figure out what we can do to either achieve the justice or achieve the good that we see in these worlds, or to dispel the evil that we can see that is throughout the world that we can really look at.
So much more to say. Thank you again, and we look forward to these conversations about medieval films, adaptation, and Tolkien. Namarie.
Namarie.